I've heard several times from some sellers, and many of them we really trust and we like these sellers and we're trying to figure out how to get them to be more successful, have more success on ACV. They'll say something like this to me. I like ACV, I want to use it first, but I still want to make sure that I'm maximizing on all my available platforms. I use some wholesalers, I use a physical auction or two, and I use ACV auctions. And isn't it logical to think that by using all of these platforms, the end result will be I'll get more money for all my cars? And it really kind of stopped me in my tracks because I knew something wasn't right about it, but it's a hard conversation to argue with. And again, we don't want to argue, we want to coach, and we want to show best practices. But this one really made me have to think. So I said, elaborate more for me. Tell me how you like to use ACV, how it fits in your process, and what the outcome is. So they did. And there's a consistent theme, which is that I use ACV first. I price the car for probably a little more than I own it for, a little above market money. And if I get it, great, I sell the car. And if I don't, then the car ends up going down the funnel. I let some wholesalers take a look at it and give me their best numbers on it, and eventually I just ship it to auction. Then I pressed them and said, well, what's the outcome? When we look at the data, are you doing better at the auction? Because the God's honest truth is, we want the sellers to take these cars wherever they're going to make the most money for them. If they're consistently underselling cars on ACV, we know that's not a long-term relationship that's bound to happen. We don't want to waste their money. We don't want to waste their time. But in these situations, what we found when we looked at the data, it was amazing. Many, many times, they were actually getting more money up front on ACV than they were when they sold the car 3 weeks, 4 weeks later at an auction. They were ahead of the game. They passed on it because they were greedy, and then they ended up taking less money down the road. The best case scenario for sellers and ACV is that they don't try and leverage a philosophy like this. While it makes logical sense on the surface, they're actually shooting themselves in the foot, so to speak, when they use ACV. If they're going to use ACV, they've got to use it with full intent to sell. And they've got to be okay making a little, losing a little, just like they would at the physical auction. Look, guys, this is wholesale. And in the world of wholesale, the seller doesn't set the price, the market does. And nobody, regardless of what they tell you, is taking 20 or 30 or 50 cars a week to the auction and making money on every single one of them. They're lying through their teeth if they're telling you that. And if you do a data exchange with them, it's clear as day. But that's okay. The goal of wholesale is to run about a net zero. You can run a little profit, you can run a little loss, and that's okay. But in order to average out at those numbers, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers in there. What we want to do is get ACV fully embraced by these sellers, because I guarantee you, when they actually jump in with both feet, the results will astound them. We've seen it so many times. So the sellers who went from utilizing all platforms and over time have fully embraced ACV are getting better results month over month, year over year with ACV than they ever did before. So here's why. This goes back to a lot of the stuff that we already talked about. If the car is priced aggressively because the seller has full intent to sell it, and they're not sandbagging saying, well, I've still got wholesalers A, B, and C, and I've got 1 or 2 auctions I could hit with this car, but instead they scrap that and they say, I'm going to sell the car on ACV. I'm going to price it to move. That's when the magic happens. That's when the car does all the money, more than the wholesalers are going to pay, and more than the physical auction can get. Remember, guys, we have way more reach, we have way better condition reports, and we can pack more people on each car than could ever happen at the physical auctions.